You're listening to Strange by Nature, your guide to the strange, weird, unbelievable, and improbable wonders of the natural world.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here today. I'm Kirk Mona, and joining me are Rachel Gimza and Victoria Thompson. We're all naturalists who together have scoured the world for weird and wonderful wonders, just to please your mammalian brain's desire for novelty. Isn't that nice? Let's do this.
Well, I get to kick us off this week. Welcome, Victoria and Kirk, this week. It's very exciting.
Hi. Good to see you.
Hey there.
Good to see y'all, too. It's always really fun when we get to hang out and just chit-chat and share weird nature things.
That's why we're here.
It is why we're here. Now, Kirk, you mentioned that our show kind of has become... I mean, it makes sense that we would have some sort of a formula, but you mentioned a while ago that our stories tend to go between two-ish categories. So I'm going to lean on that, and we are talking about... I've got a creature feature for us this week.
All right, creature of the week.
Sweet.
Fun creature of the week. So all over the world, there are all types of lizards and reptiles and snakes. Well, snakes are reptiles, but not all lizards are snakes. Anyway, but there are no more abundant type of lizard than the gecko. So me personally, I have a pet leopard gecko. Her name is Yarrow. She's adorable, and my cat and the gecko kind of get after each other. It's very entertaining to watch, but that is neither here nor there. We're not talking about leopard geckos this week, but I am talking about a specific species of gecko. All
right. Geckos are cool.
Okay.
Geckos are really cool. There are over 1,500 species of gecko. It turns out they truly are the most abundant, or they are the most diverse type of lizard out there. They have the most species diversity, which is pretty cool.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
makes sense.
I did not know that, which is really fun to be able to find out. So a majority of geckos actually don't have eyelids, which I didn't notice. It makes sense, but when I think of a lizard,
blinking at you, or
kind of a bug-eyed there.
Look, but when I think of lizards, I think of them like having an eyelid and being able to blink, you know. And I never like made the connection that geckos don't have eyelids, but it does create that very iconic thing that happens in cartoons all the time, where they have to lick their eye, the membrane. It's called a brill. Over their eye to keep it moist. So they do actually do that. Anyway.
Gotcha.
It was a weird little tidbit that I was just like, huh. Okay. But the species that I'm talking about is actually native to Madagascar and some of the islands near Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. They are a group of geckos, so there's more than one species. It is the fish scale gecko. Have either of you heard of them before?
I'm not familiar with this one.
I have not heard of fish scale geckos.
Okay.
Or fish tail geckos, for that matter.
Fish tail geckos might actually be a thing, so I'm going to make sure everyone knows. Fish scale geckos. Now, there's a reason why they are called this.
Okay.
Generally, as is really common with most geckos, they are a nocturnal species. They also are arboreal, so they hang out and they have those sticky toe pads that are pretty common. And they eat insects, which, sure, absolutely makes sense. They look like geckos. They don't look like there's anything particularly special about them.
There must be, because you're talking about it on the show. So.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
Well, there is something. There is something. We'll get to it. But they have like those toe pads. They're generally not very... They're pretty dull looking, like a brown gray. They might have a little bit of a sheen to them. Their scales, however, are... When you think of a gecko, you think of their skin as being relatively smooth looking. But here you can tell
Sure,
that
yeah.
they have scales, kind of like you can tell on like a snake or a larger lizard. These have some of the largest scales of any gecko, which is pretty cool. They're a decent size when it comes to the gecko. Like, they look like snakeskin. I'm going to be flat out honest. But the reason why they are called tail gecko or fish scale geckos, I keep wanting to call them fish tail.
Get it right.
They're not. Nah. So their scales are like nested in between each other. They're kind of like layered, kind of like a stack of Post-its. So they're layered together.
Sure.
Like the bottom edge isn't fused with the next bit on their skin, and they're like can be flared, like when you flip a stack of Post-it notes all together.
Sure.
Yeah.
The reason why I wanted to talk about them, and I don't have a ton else about them, but they have a interesting defense mechanism. And their defense mechanism...
We've had a lot about defense mechanisms on the show the past few weeks.
We have. Well, this one fell in my lap, and I was like, oh, I have to talk about this. This particular type of gecko is able to, if something catches it and has it in their mouth, they are able to rapidly shed their skin and scales off of their body, just slough it off.
Oh, okay.
To escape from the predator.
So like all their scales just like slough off all at once or something?
So the predator gets like a mouthful of scales?
Mouthful of scales and like
the so the scales
skin.
And the skin.
Uh-huh.
Just all slides right off. I mean, I've heard about lizards and things that can drop their tail and like regrow them. It's kind of reminiscent of that, but it's like basically your whole exterior. Like, is it the whole thing?
Sounds like it would be painful.
I don't know about that, but I will tell you, after that has happened, they look disgusting because it's all like the muscle and everything underneath it. They look like a naked mole rat was a lizard.
Okay, I'm looking up a picture here.
Yeah.
This is nasty looking.
Yeah,
it looks like a slug or like a see-through, like hairless mouse, kind of like it's just pinky and grayish and
they look like a chicken breast.
Wet looking.
Is what they look like.
Yes,
kind of.
Look like a chicken breast,
or like a little chicken, like a little fillet of chicken.
Yes,
It's wet.
And they do look so innocuous.
But it has a few scales stuck to it.
Yeah.
They look so normal when they have the scales on and then
they don't. Yeah, they're able to completely
pretty horrifying,
shed,
Rachel.
Isn't it horrifying? They're able to completely just shed that whole layer of skin for defense, obviously, and it takes them like at least 2 weeks to regrow all of those scales. So they're pretty vulnerable after that.
I am so grateful that humans do not do this.
Right?
Like you accidentally take your shirt off a little bit too fast one night and just, oh God, I pulled all my skin off. That's going to take 2 weeks to regrow now.
That's going to be a while.
That'd be real gross.
No, thank you.
I can't imagine what sports would be like either.
Oh my God. I don't want to know.
Any roughhousing would be off limits.
There would be no roughhousing. I'm sure sports would look completely different, actually, if like touching like skin would cause like parts of it to completely fall off.
I feel like table tennis would be a lot bigger.
Yeah,
that's where your brain went to is, table tennis. That's where it's at.
That's a good sport. Why not?
Pool.
I mean,
snooker.
Table tennis is quite big in some parts of the world.
Oh,
that's true. But it'd be even bigger.
The other cool bit I will say about these scales, before I pass us off here, is that once they regenerate their new skin and scales, they look the same as the ones that they lost.
Oh.
No,
like
pattern and
spots
everything.
and stuff? Or?
Yeah. They
So,
sometimes,
but is the patterning the same too? I see some of them have like spots. How do those appear in the same spot, or just like no? They look at the same size scales, but there may be some like variation.
from what I can
Do you know?
tell, from what I was able to tell from my research, they are indistinguishable from the original scales that they lost, which is pretty
Interesting.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so absolutely wild. I don't have anything else to tell you about him. I saw the scale list picture of this gecko next to the picture of the gecko, and I went, what on earth? And there's not a ton about it, but it is awful. Hate it. Geckos in general are really cool, but
As
really
with so many of the
something.
best topics, Rachel hates it.
Exactly. It's my favorite thing. So, my sources this week, I had.
Well, this is one that has to be seen to be believed. So definitely check out our Instagram.
Oh,
Yes.
it'll be there. So my sources this week there was an article called, and they really knew what they were doing, Off the Scale, a new species of fish scale gecko with exceptionally large scales.
Oh man.
And that was
Gotta tip the hat to the scientific paper title puns.
and
Wow.
that was in the National Library of Medicine, by Mark Schertz, Juan Daza, Jorn Kohler, Miguel Ventus, and Frank Gla. They did a great job. I also had some great knowledge gained from the website called Gecko Time, which was wild. And then, of course, Wikipedia. We are going to take a quick break, and when we return, it'll be Victoria.
Hey, we're back. If you remember, last week I was talking about left-handed people and the discrimination they've faced over the centuries and the science behind, what little we know about what causes left-handedness or right-handedness in people. If you remember back in episode 170, I also talked about how we and other vertebrates are all bilaterally symmetrical. This was in the context of another thing, but meaning the left and right sides of our bodies are mirror images of each other, more or less.
Right.
And it turns out that mirror image symmetry is not just something that some animals express on a macroscopic level, like right and left hands, but something that's baked into the very basis of life. So, I got started thinking about this when I was doing my left-handed episode last week, but this is a kind of an even deeper dive. So let's start with DNA, which are the literal building blocks of life. So DNA is famously a double helix or spiral shape, and spirals have a handedness to them, either right or left. And DNA is usually a right-handed helix. But the 20 different amino acid building blocks that make up all of life's proteins are left-handed. And when there are structures like these that show handedness, it's called chirality. That's the science word for it. Yeah. So if you think of, to explain the concept better. It's complicated. Like there's, it's not very intuitive. And there's also different ways of figuring out chirality based on either how the molecule looks or how it diffracts light in a solution. You don't want the details.
Oh, great. Amazing.
It's not the
I will
important
shelve that
piece
and
of
look into
information.
it myself. Amazing.
But to kind of just like illustrate the concept, if you think of the capital letters O and Q, and if you take the mirror image of an O, you can just pick up that mirror O and plop it right on top of the first one and they match. If you take the mirror image of a capital Q, you can't do that. The little tails of the Q's will face in different directions. Right. So Q is chiral and O is achiral. And okay, another little vocabulary we're going to have to talk about this episode. The mirror image of molecules are called enantiomers. So the right-handed enantiomer is usually designated with an R for rectus, thanks Latin, and the left-handed one with an S for, of course, sinister.
Yes.
Many molecules besides DNA are chiral, and it can really make a huge difference in how they work or don't work, or in how they smell. My favorite example is the chemical called carvone that's found in some essential oils. R-carvone, so the right one, is responsible for the main smell of spearmint, and apparently has been approved as a mosquito repellent by the US EPA. I did not know that before. S-carvone, the left-handed one, is responsible for the main smell of caraway. So spearmint versus caraway.
So it's the same molecule,
same molecule,
components that make it up, same type atoms,
same structure, same everything, except just mirror image.
And it smells totally different.
Yeah, and it also can be used to prevent potatoes in storage from sprouting prematurely.
I mean, on the one hand, that seems completely bonkers.
Yeah, absolutely.
But on the other hand, it doesn't seem all that strange because it's like things like smell and whatnot are all about like things fitting into receptors in a certain way, and if it fits in a different way because it's flipped the other way, it's going to activate different things and it's going to smell different, you know. But like you kind of think a molecule is a molecule. As long as it's got all the same stuff, it shouldn't matter. But
no,
it
does make a big difference. Yeah. And not only in how it smells, but in how other chiral molecules can interact with it. And since a lot of the biological molecules are chiral, this makes it a very important property in how basically all of life works. And it also makes it important in medicine. So more than 50% of drugs are chiral molecules. Yeah. And if you're synthesizing, that is creating chiral compounds from non-chiral ingredients, the result will be a 50-50 mixture of both enantiomers. But since those are interacting with chiral molecules in our bodies, they're not necessarily going to be equally effective or do exactly the same things. So, for example, the antidepressant citalopram, which is also known as Celexa, was FDA approved in 1998. 4 years later, the FDA approved S-citalopram, which literally is S-citalopram. It's the left-handed version only. That is known as Lexapro. Probably may have heard of that.
Oh, those are the same. I mean, I've heard of both those.
Yeah,
I had no idea that they were the same molecule, basically, with different chiral versions.
And
interesting.
The dose for S-citalopram is half as much as the dose for citalopram. It has fewer side effects. It works more quickly, and can also be used to treat anxiety as well as depression, unlike the original version. And there's similar situations for other drugs too. And all of this is interesting enough, but here is where our story takes a sinister turn.
That came out of left field.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So you remember how I was saying that DNA is right-handed and proteins are left-handed?
Yeah.
Well, theoretically, would it be possible to be an organism, say a bacterium, where everything from the DNA and proteins on up is switched in chirality?
Interesting. Is it? Tell us.
I would say theoretically,
as far as we know, no such organism exists. But the idea is out there, and it is called mirror life.
Okay.
Yeah, so recently...
I gotta imagine things would work a little differently, though, and that's the catch, right?
A little bit.
This is like the TV people in Doctor Who. Flatline.
Kind of.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I must have missed that episode. Recently, an interdisciplinary group of scientists got together to study how risky mirror life could be, theoretically, and published a fascinating report in Science in December 2024. So this is quite recent. Currently, scientists are not capable of creating such a bacterium or any other life form. They can't even create a regular bacterium from the ground up.
Gotcha.
But they are currently able to synthesize mirror image molecules, including like some of the constituent pieces of DNA. And there are all kinds of steps being taken currently to be able to fully synthesize a regular, simple kind of bacterium.
What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? Biotechnology is rapidly advancing. So this theoretically could be possible within, say, 10 years or so, they estimate. And the authors of this report say that after examining the evidence, they are calling for a broader discussion of the issue and feel that the dangers posed by such research are so great that steps toward creating mirror life should be stopped entirely.
There it is.
Yeah.
Yep. They say that many of them were skeptical of how dangerous it actually could be, but the more they studied and discussed, the more alarmed they became, which is not how you want to hear how these discussions are going.
No, and I'm going to be honest, just hearing about it on the podcast and the bare bones that I've gotten, I'm like, this feels like a not great idea to make this thing that is the mirror opposite of life as we know it.
So the thing is, mirror bacteria could, potentially survive and multiply because there are enough achiral nutrients in nature that they could use them. Because, if there were a chiral molecule that's like sugar or whatever, they wouldn't be able to use it because it would fit wrong. But there's enough ones that are achiral that they could use it. And
there'd
so
be nothing, it'd have no competition, right? Like, is that the word?
Exactly. So because of the chirality of all life, many of the defenses that we have against bacteria are based on how chiral molecules fit together. So if a mirror bacterium was created that was twisted around the other way,
so bad.
It could evade being recognized and destroyed by our immune systems and all the other types of defenses that organisms have against bacteria.
Oh, no.
So that means it could theoretically outcompete. Yeah, super bacteria could outcompete all the other bacteria in the environment because their reversed chirality could help them avoid predators and resist bacteriophages, which are viruses that infect bacteria, and also resist antibiotics. So, potentially this could eventually lay waste to basically the food web.
I gotta wonder, as old as life is on Earth, especially bacterial life, the fact that this hasn't arisen on its own, when theoretically it is possible, kind of makes you wonder if it really is possible. Like, or is there something that has consistently stopped this from happening? Because as we well know, and we talk about on the show, like when there is an advantage to be taken, often it is nature finds a way, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like if some form of life could go down this route, and it could be that just the inertia is so strong in the direction it can't be overcome. But like, if something were to arise in this sort of form, it could just be unstoppable. And the fact that it hasn't happened makes me kind of go, I wonder if there's something that we're missing that is a fundamental thing that's just stopping this from happening.
An interesting
question.
And
makes it not practical.
I don't know.
I mean, life will also take the easiest route.
That's also true.
Or, like, why mess with something else if the route that you already took is working just fine? You're able to, like, differentiate,
Yeah, no, that's fair. Fascinating topic.
Yeah. At any rate, all of this is alarming enough that the group recommends preventing the production of mirror life entirely through laws, regulations, and consensus agreements.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. Well, as you're alluding to, Kirk, in an era when it seems nobody can agree on anything, this may sound unlikely to happen. But there is precedent, such as with smallpox research and environmental nuclear testing, where these are seen as so harmful and dangerous to everyone on Earth that everyone just agrees not to do it. And the authors of Mirror Life...
They kind of agree not to do it.
They kind of, yeah. Well, more or less. But the authors of this report feel that Mirror Life is up there with those types of things that really should be banned and just not done, which is scary and fascinating at the same time.
Yeah, thanks for that nightmare fuel.
Sure, no problem. What I'm here for. This is all very recent, obviously, and it remains to be seen where the scientific and legal communities take this. But it is pretty interesting. Well, as a little bit of nightmare fuel there.
A little bit scary.
My sources this week were Wikipedia, that article in Science that I mentioned called Confronting the Risks of Mirror Life. There was an article about the article from the scientists that was by two of the panelists, John Glass and Kate Adamala. That's how that's pronounced? Adamala? No? And a useful November 2017 article from Water Research on Chiral Pharmaceuticals by Edmund Zanganato and colleagues. We are going to take a little break, and when we come back, it'll be Kirk.
All right, everybody, welcome back. I am here this week to talk about a pretty cool animal. It's going to be familiar to a lot of our listeners, namely those in the U.S., or really in all of North America, where this animal lives. But keep in mind that half our listeners are from outside of the U.S., where this animal isn't found. In honor of the upcoming High Holy Holiday, I present to you this week the whistle pig, the woodland marmot, the woodchuck,
Yay!
or as it is most commonly known, the humble groundhog.
Whistle pig.
Yes. Now,
I see them all the time in the spring.
excellent. As I referenced, the holiday of Groundhog's Day is right around the corner. This is a holiday celebrated in the United States and in Canada. Basically, it's like a weird North American thing. Groundhogs are found all the way, you got to kind of picture this now, from eastern Alaska
Okay.
to eastern Canada. And you want to basically picture a cone that starts in Alaska and then widens as it heads east to the eastern coast of North America. They also extend down the whole of the Mississippi River Valley, so that almost the entire eastern U.S. is covered by their range. They don't, when you get really, really far south, like as far as I know, they're not in Florida. It gets just a bit too much for them down there.
Basically,
But-
most of North America is covered a couple feet deep in groundhogs.
Yeah, but not the west, like the western U.S.
That was terrible.
Yeah, the western U.S. there are no groundhogs.
Okay.
It was terrible.
Yes, indeed. So not all of North America has this animal, but a lot of us do. And apparently they're on the move as well. They're expanding their range. There's like this tentacle of groundhogs, which that's one of the weirder phrases I've ever said. Like, I mean, if you look at a range map, there's a tentacle that extends down into British Columbia. And that sort of tendril keeps dropping south every year, which is kind of interesting. They're coming for you, kind of in that Pacific Northwest area. If you're not familiar with the groundhog, they are about the size of a house cat, but they have short clawed legs, which are good for digging, and they live in burrows underground.
I was going to say for Australian listeners, it's a bit like a wombat, I think. Not that I've ever actually seen a wombat.
Fair. I think that's fair.
A smaller wombat, but yes.
Yeah. So, like, what are they? Right? I think even those of us who live with them don't always really understand kind of what they are. Well, simply put, they're big squirrels.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're big squirrel.
They don't climb trees, so they're classified as ground squirrels, along with the prairie dogs and chipmunks. They belong to the family group Sciuridae, which is the squirrels. So if you look at the scientific name, though, it's Marmota monax. And I dig that a lot because the species epithet contains my last name, Mona. But the genus Marmota actually tells us that the groundhog is a type of marmot.
Of course.
And many of our listeners will be familiar with marmots, as they have alpine marmots in Europe, there's the steppe marmot in Asia, and many, many others. Generally, they tend to be located in mountainous regions in North America, Europe, and Asia. There aren't any found in South America, Africa, or Australia, though. And I will point out that at the beginning of my story, I said one of the other names for them is the woodland marmot. And you've probably never heard that name before because I completely made it up. It's just something that I've been pushing for that name for a while. because I think it'd be really cool if we called them woodland marmots instead of, groundhog, which seems so,
Hey,
impolite to call them a
whistle.
I
groundhog.
mean, they could just add another name to their
They
many
can,
names.
yes.
They
I have
can.
no delusions that this is going to catch on. Most of us disagree on whether or not to call them groundhogs or woodchucks. So adding in a third name is completely unnecessary, but I don't care. It brings me joy. The reason I like the name woodland marmot is because the groundhog tends to be the weirdo because they can live in mountainous areas. They do like mountainous areas. They also just live in like backyards, farms. I think of them more as like wooded areas than a deep forest. They don't really like a heavily forested area. They like a bit more of like a wooded area. And they're definitely not as strictly mountainous as other species of marmots. So, okay, that's a little background on like what is a groundhog. But what I kind of want to talk about is what's up with Groundhog's Day, because as this comes out, we're just a few days away from Groundhog's Day. Why do us crazy North Americans celebrate a day devoted to these giant squirrels? Right? It's of all the things, right? Like bizarre.
It's because Puxatawny Phil tells us whether or not we're gonna have a long winter or not.
Well, let's dig into that, all right? I think it all comes down to the fact that groundhogs are amazing hibernators. This is where we need to start. Mm-hmm. They are true hibernators. They aren't just sleeping in the winter. They're actually drastically decreasing their heart rate, their respiration, and their body temperature. And amazingly, their body temperature goes from around like where ours is in the summertime down to just 2 degrees Celsius or 35 Fahrenheit. So they are just a few degrees away from being completely ice. They are a living popsicle, okay? Their heart rate...
That's wild. I did not know that.
Their heart rate drops from about 130 beats per minute to as low as 4 beats per minute. That's 1 beat every 15 seconds. They only take 1 breath every about 6 minutes. So... when you stop and think about that, this is truly as close to death as you can come. And I often have to correct the misconception when I'm teaching that hibernation is most like sleeping. Because all these little kids' books are like, the animals all go to sleep for the winter. And it's like, no. What hibernation most resembles is death. It's a many month-long near-death experience. And when it comes to the smaller rodents, around 80% of the animals that enter hibernation for the winter actually never come back out. They do not survive. Hibernation is a desperate survival gamble. Yeah, a lot of animals will die in the process because it's so close to death. It's a razor thin, thing. It's a gamble. It's a way to survive the winter. Now, groundhogs being larger, they tend to survive at a much higher rate, but it is still a dangerous thing. Now, for those who don't know, here in North America, we celebrate Groundhog's Day on February 2nd. And the holiday tradition has to do with seasonal weather prediction, as Rachel indicated. The legend is that groundhogs emerge from their dens on February 2nd to have a look around. And if they see their shadow, they get so scared that they run back into their dens. And that is an indication or omen that we're going to have 6 more weeks of winter because the woodchucks are, hiding away. The groundhogs are hiding. But if they do not see their shadow, presumably they stay out, and that's an indication that we're going to have an early spring. Though to be fair, it's never really defined in the legend what like early spring means. Is it only like 3 weeks of more winter we're going to get? 0 weeks? Like, does it start now? Like, hey, it's spring. I have no idea. And it's just kept vague on purpose. Vague, yeah. It's almost like using a single animal's behavior combined with the weather on a random day to predict seasonal climate predictions isn't a good idea.
Right?
So it is fun. And if you look at Punxsutawney Phil, who's, the sort of, they want to claim that he's the official groundhog, and that's just sort of them saying that. Who's to say, that's in one town. And we're going to go with like the weather in that one town. But if you do look at the history, what they've shown is that particular groundhog, that particular town is terrible at predicting whether or not we're going to get an early spring or not. It doesn't work. There's no science. It's not scientific to use this to predict what's going to happen. But
you don't say.
But yet, I would like to point out that there is science behind this holiday, at least theoretically.
Okay.
I don't know if it really pans out, but there is some thought behind this. So groundhogs do wake up in the early spring to check out their territory. This usually happens on nice, warmish spring days, and then they'll like retreat back into their den to wait until like it gets a little bit warmer. They won't necessarily go back into a deep hibernation, but they could maybe like enter a mild state of torpor to kind of help get through the lean times until the bounty of spring arrives. In the very southern end of their range, I guess this could plausibly happen on February 2nd. But like here where we live in Minnesota, or even further north up in Canada, if you come out of hibernation on February 2nd, you are simply put dead. That's it. That was a bad choice. You're just not going to make it. February
Even Pennsylvania, 2nd, maybe.
Yeah, not. Pennsylvania too. February 2nd is squarely in the middle of winter, and you probably don't have the energy stored up to re-enter hibernation because it takes a lot of energy to come out of hibernation and warm your body up. So if you wake up in the middle of the winter, you're not going to survive. So while they can wake up this early down south, they don't do it in most of their range. So then why do we celebrate on February 2nd? It's always such a strange date, right? And what does shadows have to do with this? Why is that part of the legend? Well, to understand, we have to back up to the winter solstice, which is on December 21st. That's the shortest day of the year. Now, in theory, it should mark kind of like the middle of winter, because like it's going to start getting like more light afterwards. But just like we call the summer solstice midsummer sometimes, but really it's also kind of like when summer begins. And same thing with winter. It could be midwinter, but really it's kind of when winter officially begins, because there's this delay in the seasons. Basically, it takes about a month or so for the Earth to really cool down. So while the least light is technically in December, it feels like we get the least solar heat about a month later in January, when it's like, usually, we're at our coldest. Now, the spring or vernal equinox is when there's equal amounts of day and night. That falls on March 21st, and it marks when it actually begins to feel like spring, even though astronomically it's mid-spring. But, we kind of say, it's March 21st is when spring starts. Now, if you do some little math here, there are 90 days between the solstice and the equinox. 45 days, which is the middle point between the two, is guess what date?
February 2nd.
February 2nd. Yeah.
There it is.
So the reason Groundhog's Day is on February 2nd is that this is the date that's exactly halfway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. And if not for approximately like that 45-day lag of seasons, Groundhog Day would kind of be the beginning of spring, but really it marks the middle of winter. It's really the exact midpoint of winter. And so it's a good day to kind of take stock of what's coming. Now, tradition has it that if the groundhog sees his shadow, i.e. it's a sunny day, he'll be scared back into his den and we have 6 more weeks of winter. Well, in the winter, sunny days are because there's no cloud cover, and that is likely due to cold, high-pressure weather systems from the north. Days with no clouds means cold, clear Arctic air, and winter isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
But in contrast, if it's cloudy, it could, and this is a bit of a stretch, but it could indicate low-pressure systems from the south are bringing more humid, warm air and starting to break winter's grip on the land, pushing out those pesky, high-pressure cold weather systems. So that kind of explains like the shadow, no shadow thing. But why do we say like winter will go another 6 weeks if he sees his shadow? It seems oddly specific, like 6 weeks. Well, 6 weeks is about
days?
45 days.
There it is.
So like I said, Groundhog's Day is 45 days from the winter solstice, and the spring equinox is also 45 days away from Groundhog's Day. So in reality, whether the groundhog sees shadow or not, the spring equinox is going to arrive 6 weeks after the Groundhog's Day. So the general idea, though, it's pretty good, like general idea that if we, not necessarily that one specific day, but if you were looking kind of around Groundhog's Day, if we're tending to have many, many days, like weeks at a time of high pressure systems still dominating the weather pattern on Groundhog's Day, that's likely going to continue until around the equinox. But if we already have low pressure systems already starting to break up the weather pattern and push that cold air further north, then maybe, we're going to get an earlier start to the spring sometime before the equinox. To be clear, it is not a great system, but it does point out that if we pay attention to the patterns around us, we can be educated about the predictions we make about what lays ahead. And that's really the fundamental basis of all weather prediction and what meteorologists do today. But lucky for us, they use computers and huge data sets instead of just looking at the shadows of groundhogs.
They have some better tools today.
Yeah, our tools are better.
Oh,
but the idea of looking at weather patterns and understanding predominant weather patterns and whatnot is really the key to how we understand weather. So it's a pretty cool thing. And it's just a quirky, fun holiday that no one does a whole lot of stuff for in our country, to be honest.
It gave us one of the all-time great movies, in my opinion.
And it gave us the movie Groundhog's Day, which is probably the greatest achievement that Groundhog's Day has ever or will ever achieve. So,
yeah.
Amen.
Well, that's it. That's it for this week's show. It's time to go. But we're going to see everybody next week.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's show. Be sure to subscribe. New episodes drop every Wednesday, and we love sharing this strange world with all our listeners. If you would be so kind as to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, that would be great. It lets other lovers of the strange discover the show. You can reach us by searching for Strange by Nature Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky. You can send us an email as well. Our address is contact@strangebynaturepodcast.com. If you want more information about the show, you can check out our website, strangebynaturepodcast.com, and you can support the show and get ad-free episodes at patreon.com/strangebynature. Until next week, get outside, stay curious, and embrace the strange.